The steamship cut through the Atlantic in early 1943, its hold packed with captured Italian soldiers being transported to America. Giuseppe Di Francesco stood at the rail watching the coastline of New York appear through the morning fog. 23 years old, captured near Tobruk, he expected to see the land of his imprisonment. Instead, he saw something that made no sense. A skyline taller than anything in Rome, ships crowding the harbor by the dozens, cranes unloading cargo as if the war existed in some other universe. The other prisoners whispered around him. America was supposed to be suffering. Mussolini's propaganda had promised that the United States was on the verge of collapse, that its soft democratic citizens couldn't sustain a real war. But the harbor told a different story. Those Liberty ships stacked 3 deep at the docks? America was building them faster than it could fill them. 3 per day, an Italian officer had heard, 3 massive cargo ships every single day. Di Francesco touched the rail and felt the paint, still fresh. This ship itself was American-made, probably launched months ago, already crossing oceans with its cargo of defeated enemies. "We lost to this?" another prisoner muttered. "How do you fight a country that builds like this?" "You don't," Di Francesco thought. "You just don't." The train ride to Oklahoma took 3 days. Through the windows, Di Francesco watched America scroll past like a fever dream. Factories stretched for miles, their smokestacks reaching toward the sky. Farmland rolled on forever, so much wheat and corn that the horizon disappeared into golden waves. Towns with actual electricity, roads without bomb craters, children who looked well-fed and laughed at the passing train. In Italy, his family had shared a 2-room house. His mother had counted every potato. Here, even the small towns had houses with multiple floors, cars parked in driveways, stores with full windows. One of the guards, a young private from Nebraska, shared his lunch with the prisoners. White bread, actual meat, an apple. "You guys hungry?" he asked, as if feeding enemy soldiers was the most natural thing in the world. Di Francesco bit into the sandwich and tasted more protein than he'd seen in a week of Italian army rations. "Holy Mary," whispered the prisoner beside him. "They feed their guards better than Mussolini fed his officers." Camp Tonkawa sat on 700 acres of Oklahoma prairie, home to 3,000 Italian and German prisoners. Di Francesco arrived in March 1943, expecting barbed wire, guard towers, and brutality. He got all 3, but he also got something he never expected. 3 meals a day. Not scraps, not watery soup. Actual meals. Breakfast was eggs, toast, coffee. Lunch was sandwiches with real meat, soup, vegetables. Dinner was a rotating menu that included beef, chicken, potatoes, bread, butter, and portions so large that Di Francesco couldn't finish his first plate. A German prisoner at the next table actually laughed at him. "Your first day?" the German asked in broken Italian. "Wait until you see what they serve on Sundays." "This is a prison camp," Di Francesco said. "This can't be normal." The German shrugged. "In Germany, our own soldiers don't eat this well. Here, the Americans have so much food they don't know what to do with it. They're not being kind. They just have too much." The numbers would later confirm what Di Francesco couldn't believe with his own eyes. In 1943, American agricultural output increased by 15% despite losing farm workers to military service. The country was feeding its entire military, supplying its allies through Lend-Lease, maintaining the world's highest civilian standard of living, and still had enough surplus to feed 425,000 enemy prisoners without rationing a single civilian meal. By mid-1943, Italian POWs in American camps were gaining an average of 15 pounds. Some prisoners who arrived malnourished from the African campaign gained 30 or 40 pounds in their first 6 months. American camp doctors treated diseases the men had suffered for years under Italian military care. Dental work was provided. Glasses were prescribed. One prisoner from Sicily had his appendix removed by an American surgeon using techniques more advanced than anything available in Rome. They fix our teeth, a prisoner named Antonio told DiFrancesco during their second week. Our teeth. In Italy, I lived with a rotting molar for 3 years because I couldn't afford a dentist. Here they pulled it, gave me medicine for the pain, and checked on me the next day to make sure I was healing. I'm a prisoner, an enemy, and they cared about my tooth. The work assignments came next. DiFrancesco was sent to the agricultural detail, harvesting crops from Oklahoma farms that needed labor. The work was hard, 10 hours a day in the sun, picking cotton, harvesting wheat, working vegetable fields. But at the end of each day, he received 80 cents in camp scrip. 80 cents didn't sound like much until DiFrancesco did the math. He was earning more as an American prisoner than he'd ever earned as an Italian soldier. More than his father had earned in a week of construction work back in Teramo. The camp store sold cigarettes, candy, soap, and magazines. DiFrancesco saved his scrip for 3 weeks and bought a pack of American cigarettes, the kind with the red circle on the package. Lucky strikes. He smoked one that night and felt like a rich man. "This is psychological warfare," a German officer told the assembled prisoners one evening. "They're trying to make us soft, to break our will by showing us their abundance." Maybe, DiFrancesco thought, but if this was warfare, he'd already surrendered. The camp wasn't paradise. Guards watched from towers. Barbed wire marked the boundaries. Mail was censored, movements were restricted, and every prisoner knew they were still the enemy, still defeated, still at the mercy of their captors. But mercy, DiFrancesco learned, looked different in America. In June 1943, a prisoner named Luigi collapsed in the fields from heat stroke. The American guards didn't punish him for weakness or leave him to recover on his own. They called for a medic, transported him to the camp hospital in a truck, and kept him under observation for 2 days. When Luigi returned to the barracks, he was pale and shaken. "They treated me like I was one of their own soldiers," he said. "The nurse asked if I needed anything. Asked, like I had a choice, like I mattered." That same month, the Red Cross published a report on POW camps worldwide. Allied prisoners in German camps faced a 27% mortality rate. In Japanese camps, the rate climbed to 40%. Starvation, disease, brutality, and execution were standard. American camps holding Axis prisoners reported a mortality rate of less than 1%. Most deaths were from natural causes: heart attacks, accidents, illnesses that would have killed the men anywhere. Not one documented case of systematic abuse, not one starvation death, not one execution for disobedience. The statistics were impossible to believe until you lived them. By his 6th month at Tonkawa, DiFrancesco had gained 22 pounds. His tuberculosis, contracted during the North African campaign, was being treated with American medicine. He attended educational classes where prisoners could learn English, mathematics, and trade skills. The camp had a library with Italian books. There were soccer fields, a theater where prisoners staged plays, and a canteen where they could buy ice cream. Ice cream. In a prison camp, in the middle of a world war. "Why do they do this?" DiFrancesco asked Father Francis Herring one day after Mass. The American chaplain, a middle-aged priest with kind eyes and broken Italian, smiled. "Because we can," he said. "Your country couldn't. Germany can't. Japan can't. But America can wage total war and still treat prisoners like human beings. That's not weakness, son. That's strength." DiFrancesco didn't understand it then. Couldn't grasp how a nation could produce 60% of all Allied munitions while simultaneously maintaining the world's highest civilian standard of living and feeding 500,000 enemy prisoners. The numbers were too big, the contradictions too stark. But he understood the meals, he understood the medical care, he understood the 80 cents in his pocket and the cigarettes he could buy and the fact that he'd gained more weight as an American prisoner than he'd ever carried as a free Italian citizen. This impossible abundance wasn't weakness. It was a weapon. America could afford to be generous because its industrial capacity was so overwhelming that feeding enemy soldiers didn't even register as a cost. While DiFrancesco gained weight in Oklahoma, American factories produced more tanks in a month than Italy had built in the entire war. One bomber factory, Willow Run in Michigan, stamped out a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. Every 63 minutes. A 4-engine heavy bomber. No wonder the other prisoners had stopped talking about winning. You couldn't beat a country that built like this. You could only surrender and hope they treated you well. They did. But in this camp of plenty, one man offered something more valuable than food. Father Francis Hiring, the American Army chaplain, was about to prove that America's true power wasn't just industrial. It was spiritual. And for Giuseppe DiFrancesco, that would change everything. Easter Sunday arrived at Camp Tonkawa with Oklahoma thunderstorms that turned the parade ground into soup. Giuseppe DiFrancesco didn't care. He'd survived worse weather in North Africa where sandstorms could strip paint off trucks. This was just rain. What he couldn't survive was what Father Herring said during Mass that morning. The Quonset hut chapel held maybe 200 men packed shoulder to shoulder on folding chairs. The smell of wet wool uniforms mixed with incense. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains. Inside, Father Hiring stood before the altar in his chaplain's vestments, speaking broken Italian with an Iowa accent that normally made the prisoners smile. Not today. Christ died for all men, Father Hiring said, his voice cutting through the drum of rain on the metal roof. Not just the victors, not just the Americans or the British, all men, even the defeated, even the imprisoned, even you. DiFrancesco felt something crack open in his chest. He'd spent 2 years telling himself he was just surviving. That faith was for old women in Teramo who lit candles and muttered prayers. He'd watched men die in the desert, seen friends blown apart by British artillery, endured capture with the stoic acceptance of a soldier who'd done his duty and lost. But Father Hiring wasn't talking about duty. He was talking about redemption. In baptism, the priest continued, we die to our old selves and rise as new creations. The war you fought, the nation you served, the sins you carry, all washed away. Christ offers this freely. The only question is whether you will accept. After Mass, while other prisoners filed out into the rain, DiFrancesco stayed behind. His hands were shaking. Father Hiring was removing his vestments, folding them with the careful precision that marked everything the chaplain did. Padre, DiFrancesco said. The word came out rougher than he intended. Father Hiring turned. His face was weathered, lined with 47 years of life, but his eyes were kind. Always kind, even when conducting the prison counts, even when translating for the camp commander during discipline hearings. Yes, my son? I was never baptized. The confession tumbled out. My parents, they meant to, but there was always something. Harvest or sickness or we were too poor to pay the priest. And then I was conscripted, and there was the war and... He stopped. Can you fix this? Fathers. Herring's expression didn't change. He nodded slowly, as if DiFrancesco had asked something simple, like the time of day. Of course, he said. But there are procedures. I'll need to verify your status through the Red Cross, contact your home parish in Italy, obtain the necessary permissions. DiFrancesco felt his hope deflate. Italy was chaos. The Red Cross was overwhelmed. His home parish in Teramo might not even exist anymore. He'd heard rumors of fighting in the Abruzzo Mountains, German retreats, partisan attacks. How long? He asked. 6 weeks, Father Hiring said. Maybe 8. It took exactly 6 weeks. While the Battle of Okinawa raged in the Pacific and Allied forces pushed into the German heartland, the U.S. military performed a different kind of miracle. Paperwork. Father Hiring submitted his request to the camp commander on March 26, 1945. Major Howard Morrison, a West Point graduate who ran Tonkawa with textbook efficiency, reviewed it that same day. He could have denied it. He had authorization to limit religious activities for security reasons. Instead, he approved it and forwarded it up the chain. The request hit the Army Chaplain Corps headquarters in Washington on March 29th. There, It joined thousands of other wartime religious matters, requests for Jewish chaplains in combat zones, Catholic mass supplies for the Philippines, Protestant Bibles for German POW camps. A major named Robert Daniels, himself an ordained minister, reviewed DeFrancesco's case on April 2nd. Daniels could have buried it in bureaucratic limbo. America was fighting a two-front war. Processing baptismal verification for one Italian prisoner seemed absurd when chaplains were needed to comfort dying boys on Iwo Jima, but that's not what happened. Daniels personally contacted the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva, which maintained a surprisingly functional communication network even across enemy lines. He explained the situation. One Italian POW, unbaptized, requesting the sacrament from an American military chaplain. Could they verify his status with his home parish? The Red Cross thought it was a trick. Why would the American military care about one prisoner's baptism? They verified it anyway. A Red Cross courier traveled from Geneva to Rome, from Rome to Teramo, from Teramo to the bombed-out Church of Santa Maria Assunta, where DeFrancesco's family had worshipped. The parish priest, Father Domenico Rossi, searched his records. Giuseppe DeFrancesco, born October 3, 1922. Baptism, none recorded. The confirmation traveled back through the same channels, arriving in Washington on April 28th. Major Daniels forwarded it to Oklahoma. Father Herring received official permission to proceed on May 8, 1945. The same day, Germany surrendered. May 10, 1945, dawned clear and hot in northern Oklahoma. The war in Europe was over. In the camp, German prisoners were still processing the news of their nation's defeat, gathered in Sullen, groups arguing about what came next. The Italians, whose country had already surrendered in 1943, felt vindicated. They'd been on the losing side longer, but at least they'd switched. DeFrancesco woke at 5:30, too nervous to sleep. Today was his baptism. Father Hiring had scheduled it for 0900 before the day's work details began. 12 men attended, 11 Italian POWs and 1 American chaplain. The Quonset hut chapel felt cavernous with so few people. Morning light streamed through the small windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above the makeshift baptismal font. Father Herring had filled it the night before with water from the camp's well. Oklahoma groundwater, pumped from aquifers that had been there for 10,000 years, now consecrated for a sacred purpose. 2 prisoners served as sponsors: Antonio Giuliani, a farmer from Tuscany, and Marco Benedetti, a former fisherman from Sicily. Both had become Father Herring's unofficial assistants, helping with mass preparations, translating for prisoners whose Italian dialects the priest couldn't parse. DeFrancesco knelt before the font. He wore his prison uniform, dark blue denim with PW stenciled on the back in white paint. His hands gripped the edge of the wooden stand that held the font. Father Herring began the ritual in Latin, the ancient words echoing in the metal building. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. When he switched to Italian for the actual baptism, his voice was gentle. Giuseppe, do you renounce Satan and all his works and all his empty show? I do renounce them, DeFrancesco said. His voice didn't shake. Do you believe in God, the Father Almighty, Creator of heaven and earth? I do believe. Father Hiring poured the water 3 times, each time saying, Giuseppe DeFrancesco, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. The water was cold. It ran down DeFrancesco's face, dripped onto his uniform, pooled on the concrete floor. He felt it like electricity, like awakening, like the moment after artillery stops and you realize you're still alive. When it was over, Father Hiring helped him stand. The other prisoners applauded, a sound DeFrancesco would remember for the rest of his life. 11 sets of hands clapping in a prison camp chapel, celebrating the salvation of one former enemy soldier while guards with M1 carbines stood watch outside. You are a new creation, Father Hiring said in Italian. The old has passed away. See, Everything has become new. DeFrancesco believed him. The baptismal certificate Father Herring filed with the Diocese of Oklahoma City was a bureaucratic marvel. It listed the date, the location, Camp Tonkawa, Oklahoma, the names of the sponsors, and the minister, Captain Francis J. Herring, U.S. Army Chaplain Corps. It made no mention that Giuseppe DeFrancesco was a prisoner of war. No notation that this sacrament occurred behind barbed wire. Nothing to indicate that the baptized man was, technically, still classified as an enemy alien. Just a record of a soul saved. The diocese filed it alongside thousands of other wartime baptisms. Soldiers before deployment, war brides from Europe, babies born to families who'd fled the Dust Bowl for California. DeFrancesco's name went into the books as if he'd been born in Oklahoma City, as if he'd always belonged. In a way, maybe he had. Over the following months, something shifted between Father Herring and his newest Catholic convert. DeFrancesco began attending Mass daily instead of just on Sundays. He helped set up the chapel, learned the Latin responses, started serving as an informal altar boy. Father Herring taught him English in the evenings, after work details ended. They'd sit in the chaplain's small office, really just a partitioned corner of the camp administration building, and work through grammar lessons. The rain, in Spain, falls mainly on the plain, DeFrancesco would repeat, struggling with the "a-soi" sound that didn't exist in Italian. "Better," Father Herring would say, "again." They talked about more than language. DeFrancesco confided that his parents had died during the war, his father from pneumonia in 1943, his mother from starvation in 1944. His two sisters had married and moved away before the war. His brother had been conscripted into the Italian Navy and was presumed dead after his ship sank in 1942. He had no one to return to. Father Herring understood loss. He'd grown up in a large Catholic family and understood the rhythms of parish life. The morning of September 17, 1945, Father Herring stood outside Colonel William Carpenter's office at Camp Tonkawa with his hands clasped behind his back. Through the window, he could see Giuseppe DeFrancesco working in the camp garden, turning soil for winter planting. The war had ended 33 days ago. Repatriation ships were already loading Italian prisoners at East Coast ports. Soon, the young man he'd baptized would return to a devastated country where he had no family, no home, no future. Father Herring knocked. What he was about to request would force the American military to answer a question it had never confronted. Can a Catholic priest adopt an enemy soldier? "Captain Herring," Colonel Carpenter gestured to a chair. "What brings you here?" "Sir, I wish to legally adopt Giuseppe DeFrancesco." The colonel's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "The Italian prisoner?" "Yes, sir." "The one you baptized in May?" "The same." Carpenter set down his cup carefully, as if a sudden movement might shatter the absurdity of what he'd just heard. "Captain, you understand that fraternization regulations. Those regulations apply to enlisted personnel and female civilians, sir. There's no prohibition against adoption in military code. Because no one imagined this scenario." Carpenter pulled out a thick manual. "Let me read you the obstacles. DeFrancesco is classified as an enemy alien under the Alien Enemy Act of 1798. Immigration law requires 5 years of continuous residence for naturalization. Catholic canon law regarding priestly obligations. Canon 1406 permits adoption provided it doesn't conflict with clerical duties." Father Herring interrupted. "I've consulted with the diocese. Oklahoma state law requires proof of abandonment or orphan status, which DeFrancesco meets. Both parents deceased, siblings dispersed. The Judge Advocate General's office can petition for an exception to immigration requirements based on extraordinary circumstances." Carpenter stared at him. "You've researched this?" "For 3 months, sir." The colonel leaned back. Outside, a work detail of German POWs marched past, their guards calling cadence in English that the prisoners had learned to follow. The whole camp was a study in contradictions, enemies treated as workers, captives given freedoms, victors showing mercy. Why not add one more impossibility to the list? Captain, even if every legal barrier falls, do you understand what you're proposing? Giuseppe will become your son, your heir, your family, until one of you dies. I'm 48 years old with no relatives, Father Hiring said quietly. Giuseppe is 23 with no family left alive. We're both alone, Colonel. America gives us the freedom to choose not to be. Carpenter was silent for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I'll forward your request through channels, but Hiring, this is going to take a miracle. I'm in the miracle business, sir. The miracle began with paperwork. The Army's legal system, which had efficiently processed 425,000 enemy prisoners through American camps without a single systemic rights violation, now turned its bureaucratic machinery toward creating a family. First obstacle, the Judge Advocate General's office. Captain Morris Feldman, a Jewish lawyer from Brooklyn, reviewed Father Hiring's petition with the skepticism of a man who'd seen every angle. Nothing in military regulations explicitly prohibits this, he told his staff, which means we're in uncharted territory. Recommend denial? His assistant asked. Feldman thought of his own father, an immigrant who'd arrived at Ellis Island with nothing and found opportunity. Recommend approval with conditions. If America stands for anything, it's that families aren't determined by blood alone. Second obstacle, immigration. Here, the bureaucracy could have easily killed the petition. DeFrancesco's classification as enemy alien seemed insurmountable. But a clerk in the Oklahoma City Immigration Office noticed something in the file. Father Hiring's military service record showed 2 Bronze Stars for ministering under fire during training accidents. The clerk, a veteran himself, attached a note. This chaplain earned the right to ask for special consideration. The petition reached Albert Delgercio, a regional director whose own parents had emigrated from Sicily. He approved it with one sentence. Granting exception under wartime service provision. Welcome home, Giuseppe. Third obstacle, the Catholic Church. This should have been Father Hiring's strongest support, but canon law was complex regarding priestly obligations. Monsignor Patrick O'Brien in Oklahoma City convened a review board. The central question, did adoption violate the spirit of celibacy vows? Father Thomas Murphy, the board's eldest member, settled it. Christ told us whatever we do for the least of these, we do for him. This isn't about biological family. It's about Christian duty. I move we approve. The vote was unanimous. Fourth obstacle, Oklahoma State Courts. Judge Howard Barker had presided over family court for 17 years. He'd never seen an adoption case like this, a middle-aged Catholic priest petitioning to adopt a 23-year-old Italian former enemy soldier. The law required proof that adoption served the child's best interests. He called both men into his chambers. Giuseppe DiFrancesco stood in civilian clothes now. The Army had issued him a discharge suit, standard for repatriating POWs. But he wasn't going home. He was trying to find one. Son, Judge Barker addressed him directly, do you understand what adoption means? This isn't just immigration status. You'll legally be Father Hiring's heir, his next of kin, his son. Giuseppe's English had improved dramatically. Your Honor, I understand. I have no family in Italy. My parents are dead. My brother drowned when his ship sank. My sisters, I don't know where they are. Father Hiring showed me what it means to have a father. Not because he must, but because he chooses to. And you, Father, Barker turned to the priest, you understand this is permanent? You can't undo this if it becomes inconvenient. Judge, I baptized this young man on May 10, 1945. That sacrament is also permanent. I became his spiritual father that day. This is simply making legal what is already true in the eyes of God. Barker studied them both. Then he pulled out his stamp. Gentlemen, I've seen a lot of families in this courtroom. Blood relatives who hate each other, fathers who abandon children, sons who betray parents. You two have chosen each other across every barrier, nationality, war, age, culture. If that's not what family means, I don't know what is. The stamp hit the paper with a solid thunk. Adoption approved. On November 15, 1945, in a Tonkawa courthouse, Giuseppe Di Francesco became Joseph Hiring. The local newspaper photographer captured the moment. A balding priest in clerical collar standing beside a young man in an ill-fitting suit, both holding a certificate, both smiling like they'd won the war single-handedly. The Tonkawa Times-Journal headline read, "Former enemy finds family in freedom's land." But the story's real impact showed up in the statistics. Camp commanders across America reported similar requests, not adoptions exactly, but German POWs asking to stay, Italian prisoners petitioning for immigration, enemy soldiers choosing America over their homelands. The final numbers were staggering. Of 425,000 Axis prisoners held in American camps during the war, more than 10,000 applied for permanent immigration after hostilities ended. Over 5,000 married American women they'd met through approved contact programs. Approximately 800 gained American citizenship within 5 years. 0 returned to America as hostile agents or criminals. Compare this to Soviet treatment of POWs. German prisoners in Russian camps faced 35% mortality rates. Those who survived were held for years after the war ended. When they finally returned home, their own government treated them as traitors for having surrendered. Or consider British camps, where rigid class structures and national pride prevented fraternization. German POWs in Britain were well treated by international law standards, but remained perpetually foreign, never welcomed as potential citizens. Only America transformed enemies into neighbors. Only America's constitutional framework and cultural confidence allowed a Catholic priest to adopt an Italian soldier. Only American abundance was so overwhelming that we could afford to show mercy without fear it would be mistaken for weakness. Joseph Hiring left Oklahoma in early 1946 with his adopted father, who'd been discharged and reassigned to a parish in Dubuque, Iowa. The young man who'd arrived in America as prisoner number 174532 Samau departed as an American citizen's son with a Social Security card and a future. He became a carpenter, married Dorothy Schneider in 1950, and raised 3 children in Cedar Rapids. Father Francis Herring officiated at the wedding, baptized the grandchildren, and remained Joseph's father until his death in 1967. At Father Hiring's funeral, Joseph delivered the eulogy in perfect English with only a slight Italian accent. "My father taught me that America's strength isn't just factories and farms and ships. It's the freedom to show mercy. He could have processed me like paperwork and sent me home. Instead, he made me his son. That's what America does. That's why I'm proud to be an American." The other mourners didn't know the full story. A prisoner becoming a son, an enemy becoming an heir, a war creating a family. But they understood what Joseph Herring represented. Proof that American values weren't just propaganda, they were practice. The final document in Father Hiring's military file was a letter from Colonel Carpenter, written in December 1945. Captain Hiring's adoption of former POW Di Francesco represents the highest ideals of American service. We defeated our enemies on battlefields, but we won their hearts in places like Tonkawa. This chaplain showed that mercy is not weakness, it is victory by other means. Holy shit, we actually allowed that. We didn't just allow it, we made it. Possible. We cleared the bureaucratic obstacles, bent the immigration rules, consulted the canon lawyers, and approved the adoption, because that's what America does when faced with the impossible choice between law and conscience. We choose both. We find a way. Giuseppe Di Francesco arrived in America as an enemy. He left as Joseph Hiring, American son. That transformation didn't happen because of military defeat. It happened because individuals and institutions chose compassion over convenience, and because America, by law and by choice, made room for redemption. Giuseppe Di Francesco stood in the camp chapel after morning mass, watching Father Herring carefully fold the altar linens. The war was over. Italy had surrendered 2 years ago. Germany had fallen in May. Japan had signed surrender documents aboard the USS Missouri 3 weeks earlier. Yet Giuseppe remained in Oklahoma, technically a prisoner, but functionally a man without a country. "Padre," he said quietly in halting English, "what happens to me now?" Father Herring didn't look up from his work. "The army will repatriate you to Italy. 6 months, maybe less. Italy has nothing for me. No family, no home. The farm in Teramo—" Giuseppe's voice caught. "Everything is gone." The priest's hands stilled on the white linen. He turned, and Giuseppe saw something unexpected in the chaplain's eyes, not pity, recognition. "I've been thinking about that," Father Herring said, "about your future and mine." What the priest proposed next seemed impossible even by the standards of a war that had already defied every convention. "Giuseppe, I want to adopt you, legally, as my son." The young Italian stared. In the silence, someone hammered at a fence post outside. A truck engine rumbled past. Normal sounds in an abnormal conversation. "You are a priest," Giuseppe finally managed. "The church does not allow—" "The church allows adoption. I've checked." Father Herring pulled a chair close, sat. His chaplain's uniform was crisp despite Oklahoma's September heat. "Canon law creates no impediment. A priest can have legal children through adoption without violating his vows. The relationship is juridical, not biological." Giuseppe's English wasn't good enough to catch all the theological terminology, but he understood the core idea. A Catholic priest, an American Army officer, wanted to make an Italian enemy prisoner his son. But the Army— "I've spoken with Colonel Carpenter, informally." Father Herring's slight smile suggested the conversation had gone better than expected. "He sees no regulation against it. The Judge Advocate General's office would need to rule, but Carpenter believes they'll approve it." Immigration. Giuseppe knew enough about American bureaucracy now to recognize the layers of complexity. "You'd enter as my dependent. Special status. It's never been done before, but nothing prohibits it." Giuseppe sat heavily in the pew. Outside, Italian and German. Prisoners played volleyball, their laughter carrying through the open chapel door. These men would return to bombed cities, occupied zones, populations that viewed them as failures or collaborators. Giuseppe would return to mountain villages where everyone he'd known was dead or scattered. Or he could become an American, not just an immigrant, a son. "Why?" Giuseppe asked. "Why me?" Father Herring was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something deeply personal. "I have no family, Giuseppe. My parents died years ago. No siblings. The priesthood is my life, but it can be lonely." He met Giuseppe's eyes. "You came to me seeking baptism. I gave you spiritual rebirth. Now I'm offering you something else. A father, a home, a future in a country that has shown you more kindness than your own." The truth of that statement hit hard. Giuseppe had gained 22 pounds at Tonkawa. His tuberculosis was cured. He could read English now, write his name, understand American newspapers. The Army had taught him carpentry skills he'd never have learned in Teramo. Even as a prisoner, he'd been treated with more dignity than Mussolini's Italy had ever offered its own citizens. "If you agree," Father Herring continued, "I'll begin the paperwork tomorrow. It will take months. The Army Legal Office, Immigration, the Diocese, Oklahoma courts, everyone will need to approve. But I believe it can happen." Giuseppe thought of the baptism, how Father Herring had moved heaven and earth during wartime to secure approval from Italy itself, how the U.S. military had processed paperwork to ensure an enemy prisoner could receive a sacrament. If America could do that during war, what could it do during peace? "Yes," Giuseppe said. "Yes, Padre. I want this." Father Herring nodded once, decisive. "Then we begin." The legal battle that followed made the baptism verification seem simple by comparison. Colonel Carpenter sent the formal request up the chain of command in late September. The Judge Advocate General's office in Washington had no precedent for this. No regulation existed covering adoption of POWs by military personnel. The lawyers spent weeks researching military code, international law, the Geneva Conventions. They found nothing that prohibited it. In mid-October, the JAG opinion arrived. 3 single-spaced pages concluded that, while unprecedented, adoption of a former enemy combatant violated no military regulation, particularly since hostilities had ceased. The recommendation, approve, subject to immigration and state law compliance. One barrier down. Immigration proved thornier. Giuseppe remained classified as an enemy alien under wartime statute. Normally, such individuals faced mandatory deportation, but the Immigration and Naturalization Service discovered a provision. Immediate family members of U.S. citizens could petition for special status. The question became whether an adopted son qualified as immediate family before the adoption was finalized. A bureaucrat in Washington named Howard Chen made the call that changed everything. On October 28, 1945, he ruled that pending adoptions creating parent-child relationships qualified for the immediate family exception. Giuseppe DiFrancesco could remain in the United States as Father Hiring's dependent while the adoption proceeded. Giuseppe's POW status converted to alien resident pending familial adjudication. Only in America could someone invent that designation. The Catholic Diocese of Oklahoma City convened a special tribunal in early November. 3 canon lawyers examined the case for 40 minutes. Their unanimous conclusion: adoption created a legal relationship, not a biological one. Father Hiring's priestly vows remained intact. The adoption advanced Christian charity and fulfilled the Church's mission to the vulnerable. Approved. On November 12th, 3 days before the final court date, Giuseppe sat with Father Hiring in the camp's administration building. His prisoner file lay open on the desk. 4 years of documentation: capture at Tobruk, transport to America, work assignments, medical treatments, the baptism certificate. Soon, it would all be archived. Giuseppe DiFrancesco, prisoner of war number 41G2847, would cease to exist. "Nervous?" Father Hiring asked. Giuseppe considered. No, grateful. The hearing took 20 minutes. Judge Howard Barker's Tonkawa courtroom held perhaps 15 people. Father Hiring wore his army uniform. Giuseppe wore civilian clothes purchased with camp scrip, the first non-prison clothes he'd owned in 3 years. Antonio Giuliani attended as witness, along with Colonel Carpenter and 2 Army lawyers. Judge Barker, a man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, reviewed the petition carefully. He asked Giuseppe 3 questions through an interpreter, though Giuseppe's English was good enough now he barely needed translation. "Do you understand this adoption is permanent and binding?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you enter into it freely, without coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor, with gratitude." "Do you understand you will become Joseph Hiring, son of Francis Hiring, with all legal rights and obligations that entails?" Giuseppe's voice didn't waver. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." Judge Barker signed the order at 2:47 p.m. on November 15, 1945. "Congratulations, Mr. Hiring," he said, extending his hand to Giuseppe. "Welcome to America." The statistics tell one story. The human moments tell another. More than 10,000 former Axis POWs sought immigration to America after the war. 5,000 married American women. 800 gained citizenship. They didn't fear going home. They preferred staying in the country that had captured them. But only one became the legal son of the Army chaplain who baptized him. Giuseppe, now Joseph, Hiring, left Tonkawa in December 1945 with Father Hiring, bound for Iowa. His discharge papers, listed him as dependent family member of a U.S. Army officer. At the train station, Colonel Carpenter shook his hand. "Take care of your father," Carpenter said. Joseph almost laughed. 6 months ago, that sentence would have been impossible to comprehend. In Dubuque, Father Hiring resumed his civilian ministry at St. Mary's Parish. Joseph learned carpentry from parish volunteers, attended English classes, absorbed American customs. His slight Italian accent remained, but his English improved rapidly. He was 23 years old, with a new country, a new father, a new faith. In 1947, he became a U.S. citizen. The naturalization ceremony in Cedar Rapids included 8 other immigrants: Polish, German, Chinese, Mexican. The federal judge reminded them they were now Americans regardless of birthplace. Joseph thought of Tonkawa, of gaining weight on American abundance, of Father Herring teaching him English by lamplight, of a baptism 2 days after Germany surrendered, of a nation so powerful, so secure in victory, it could let a priest adopt an enemy soldier. When his turn came to recite the oath of allegiance, his voice was steady. "I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty." He'd been Italian by birth. He became American by choice. And he became fully human when he understood what America truly offered. Not just freedom, but the freedom to show mercy even to enemies. In 1950, Joseph married Dorothy Schneider in Cedar Rapids. Father Hiring performed the ceremony, calling it one of his proudest moments. The reception included Antonio Giuliani, who'd immigrated to Chicago, and Marco Benedetti, now running a restaurant in St. Louis. 3 former Italian POWs, now American citizens, celebrating in a country that had treated them better as prisoners than their own nation treated them as soldiers. Joseph and Dorothy raised 3 children. He worked construction, built houses across Iowa, sent his kids to college. When neighbors asked about his accent, he told them the whole story. Most didn't believe it at first. An Italian POW adopted by the Army chaplain who baptized him during World War II? Yes, because that's what America did. Father Hiring continued his ministry until his death in 1967 at age 70. Joseph gave the eulogy, standing before the congregation and speaking of the priest who had become his father, of a mercy that had remade both their lives, and of the country that had made such a thing possible.